Joining me now is Congressman Dave Schweikert from Arizona. He's a great friend of the Hill, and I'm so happy to talk to him. He's a member of the Congressional Joint Economic Committee. No surprises here, but he thinks the economic recovery is falling short. I do too. So let's find out where exactly he thinks we ought to be, where we ought to be doing better.
Your previous comment, I've always thought of you as a nerd labor economist. So.
Thank you. Well, Congressman, great to see you today. Look, on this show that we did, I had Larry Summers way back, and Larry was saying, look, infrastructure bill, it creates recurring returns for an economy without recurring effort. They're really incredibly important parts in that. But when you begin changing the other elements of the social dynamic and pouring a lot of money out there, we're going to see, potentially worrisome inflation. And he put that out there on the show. I tweeted it out. We made it a big thing. We were part of the noise around Larry Summers and the administration. But look what happened with the consumer price index. Tell us.
Well, look, and I think you need to take it a little bit even further on some of the policies that are moving right now in Washington. The world, particularly North America, is flush with massive amounts of cash. How do you move that cash into items that create capital investment, productivity? Because the other way you're going to strip inflation out of the system is pretty ugly. It's going to be the Federal Reserve once again raising interest rates, slowing down the economy. So the literature makes it pretty clear. There's really only two levers here. One is a big productivity spike that solves the imbalance right now between dollars chasing products or people. And you actually see the social spending bill that's being voted on, maybe even today, that disincentivizes that productivity. It also disincentivizes, and in some ways a pretty cruel way, a lot of the working poor to also gain skills and participate in the economy. So my great fear is we're about to finance another leg on this inflationary cycle.
Congressman, 25 years ago, when I was doing work with the Joint Economic Committee as a young staffer up there, we used to talk about entitlements. We used to talk about, how do you generate long-term solvency in Social Security, Medicare, make sure these entitlements are in the right place. And Senator Joe Manchin has been saying, hey, before we kind of move on another whole class of entitlements, we need to begin thinking about what we have. How much sympathy is there for that kind of conversation among your colleagues?
Steve, my fear is it's still disharmonious, to tell the truth. But there's something going on. I did a floor presentation about a week or so ago, and it went 50 minutes, and it's had 1,300,000 people look at it, and it was almost solely on what's actually happening on the entitlement curve. So there is a public appetite to hear the data. And look, current CBO numbers, even before this year's spending, in 29 years, we're at $112 trillion of publicly borrowed money, and that's inflation adjusted to today's dollars. 112 trillion. And every dime of that borrowing is Medicare and Social Security. 3/4 of it is Medicare, functioning 1/4 is Social Security, and the rest of the budget's actually in positive balance. So the most disruptive thing you and I and policymakers could do is we're going to have to find a way to disrupt the cost of healthcare. And that's actually where, as you start to think about the future of what we're investing in the economy, messenger RNA, the new wearable data, a souped up type of telehealth, a cure for diabetes is the holy grail. Remember, 31% of Medicare spending is just diabetes, and diabetes being 31% of Medicare, and Medicare is the primary driver of U.S. debt.
Yeah, we just did a big forum this week on diabetes and what could be done, and kind of looking at the big footprint and the non-commensurate level of research in that area. It's just fascinating arena of if you could begin looking at major gains there. And I had your colleague, Representative Michael Burgess, on, and he was saying one of the biggest frustration, and Raul Ruiz on the Democrat side said the same thing, that there are these things that we could begin doing that transform the profile of diabetes and impact, and that would mean massive savings, but that nobody's scoring the savings.
Well, and I need to take you to a much more disruptive look. We have only partially vetted it, but there is a paper out right now, oddly enough, from a prestigious university in Taiwan, saying they believe they've had a stem cell success in type 2. We already know there's been a major success for type 1. Are we ready to, instead of investing in more sugar, diabetic, insulin management type technology, and are we ready to almost do the Operation Warp Speed of curatives? Now you got to do the policy side. Are we willing to change the farm bill?
Right.
Are we willing to change what we do in nutrition supplements? Would it be cheaper for society that if you're on food stamps, or as it used to be known as food stamps, twice a week to drop off a package at your door of fresh food?
Right.
And it turns out we've been costing out, modeling this, saying change those things in the farm bill, change incentives on diet, and then step into the disruption of the technology of what happens if it's going to be expensive, but it's still dramatically less expensive than what diabetes means to the rest of society.
Dave, I know that the district that you represent, the economy there is on fire right now, and it's hot in a lot of ways, as I understand it. And you've got so you're outperforming, much of the rest of the country. But what do you see as the gaps, particularly when you look at small business and the struggles they've been through? There have been some businesses that shut down, other businesses that have met the inflection point and been able to adapt and innovate. But hiring, there's a huge hiring gap in terms of people needed for a lot of these positions. But give us a snapshot of what your district looks like and what your worry points are.
It's a brilliant question. It turns out it may be more complicated than I'm almost willing to admit. We're trying to also first get our heads around how many small, almost micro businesses have started in people's back bedroom, in their garage.
Lot. There's been a lot.
How are they? Yeah, but now we need to figure out how are they financing those, because we're not really seeing the credit movement to finance those. So was this that there was just cash in the bank or other ways to do it? What are we doing policy-wise to make it so a new economy of micro entrepreneurs, where it's you, your spouse, maybe your next door neighbor, have started a business in your garage? How do we make sure they have access to markets and also have access to fair capital? Because that's sort of revolutionary. That's actually really healthy in an economic system. Then what's happening in sort of that smaller mid-level business as they have great difficulty finding labor? What automation, what new designs of their businesses is happening so they can operate without that labor? And how much of the labor shortage is a combination of you financed folks to have cash at home so they didn't have to work or they had alternatives? And how much of it was already sort of a set demographic trend that even when we go back to normality, we're going to have to deal with the fact we're getting older very fast as a society?
Oh, I think it's a great way to frame it. The other day I interviewed the CEO of Miso Robotics, and Miso Robotics makes a robot called the Flippy. The Flippy works in hamburger joints, and they basically flip buffalo wings and French fries, the hot oil stuff. And in there, but they're growing like crazy right now because of the labor shortage in this industry. You just made me smile when you were talking about this. But let me ask you another question about the kind of broad macro dimension. So I've seen you tweeting Congressman, about global supply chain. We also know there's a whole heck of tension out there in the U.S.-China economic relationship, even though we're joined at the hip with huge amounts of trade and economic exchange. And I just had somebody on from Alibaba the other day. We were talking to some small businesses, with Alibaba coming in like the Amazon and basically selling their product in China. And I'm just wondering where all of this is going, because if you think about a genuine decoupling of China and the U.S., it's going to have staggering economic consequences. There's a lot of growing consumers, in Asia. And I'm just wondering where you're at, because I know you're interested in trade. Talked to Catherine Tai recently, the U.S. Trade Representative. What is your sense of how America gets smarter about its economic interests, but it doesn't divorce itself from buyers abroad?
Okay, first, one quick side on trade, and she's been wonderful to work with. I'm one of the leaders on trying to change some of the rules at WTO, particularly, when you're having conflict, a conflict on technology, you don't take 10 years to arbitrate it, because by then the technology you're fighting over is gone. This is actually one of the sins that's happening right now in Congress, where we're getting the policies wrong. We're not building policies saying, develop the manufacturing robustness in the United States, or particularly in North America, if you want to use the USMCA. In many ways, the tax policy, it's even in the Build Back Better, is going to slow down capital investments in the United States. So you're not touching the expensing, but if you're doing functionally a corporate minimum tax or alternative minimum tax, you basically take the value away from buying capital production goods and being able to take that depreciation. So just little policies like that change our ability to manufacture, to be a hub of production. So you continue to see the numbers of the trade deficit, and I'm not sure we're engaging in policies that are going to change that. So you lay it all together. The disincentives to enter the labor market, if you're someone with low skill, and yet you have corporate America who's now willing to train you. They're so desperate to have labor enter the workforce. And that's a really positive thing if you incentivize folks saying, hey, we're going to help you, we're going to help you with certain benefits, but we're also going to incentivize you to do the job training into the labor market. We're also going to get the tax code right so it incentivizes investing in capital goods and equipment, so we can also continue to become a much bigger hub of manufacturing. Because it's not enough to have sort of a concern on China-U.S. trade and then do all the things that make it so you're not incentivized to build that manufacturing robustness in your own country.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. And then a piece of that, I actually don't know whether the focus on, capital formation and investment was part of the bill, but a really interesting bill passed the Senate in a bipartisan way called the Endless Frontier Act. Senator Coons was one of the leaders on it, but there was a lot of bipartisan support, and it was designed to look at, how do you create the incentives to reinvest in the country, reinvest in technology, invest in science, and that was going to be the response to China, not bashing China, but rather reinvesting in the, the intellectual and technological muscle in this country and get a lot of it to stick in this country, as you're just talking about. But my understanding is it's languishing in the House. Do you have any insights into what's going on in that?
And there's another version of that I think is also moving in the Senate too. Can I give you sort of and this may be more of a libertarian economist view.
Yeah, please.
You always worry, particularly if some of the incentives are done in a grant format, saying we're going to do these grants so we can get to the next nanometer technology in chip production or quantum. I have a fascination with quantum computing and what we can do there.
Right.
And the federal government often can do amazing things at primary research. The fundamental understanding of the research, and at that point, letting the market just go wild and move its capital around to where it thinks it can promote the breakthrough. Our fear for some of us is what happens when you have a board or committee at the federal level saying, here's what we're willing to invest in. here's where we're going to, give the grant to. Because innovation disruption by committee doesn't work. Often disruption comes from the folks with the crazy idea that can demonstrate to the capital markets, hey, I may have something here that's a home run. So you want to create the disruption, but you may be better off doing it through tax policy, through intellectual protections, and not necessarily resource management from the federal government.
I always love my conversations with you, Representative Dave Schweikert. I always learn something, and I want to tell our audience, not only are you a member of the powerful House Ways and Means Committee, a member of the Joint Economic Committee, but what I'm really interested in, and we'll have to talk to you about another day, is you're a co-founder of the Blockchain Caucus. I'm very interested in cryptocurrencies and blockchain, so I hope you'll come back and educate me on that front, and it's really, really great to see you. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today.
Thank you for having me.